market power, and the monopoly. The key here is marginal revenue is not equal to price for the monopoly. The reason why is as firm produce more of the output, price will fall. Now, the monopoly has a downward sloping demand curve. The monopoly is serving the entire market. In fact, the monopoly is a price maker, unlike perfect competition firms who are price takers, right? Okay, now the associated marginal revenue, since marginal revenue is not equal to price, what is marginal revenue here? Well, I will show you a graphical representation or a graphical illustration of marginal revenue. We'll do some algebra, some simple algebra to try to understand it and look into some interpretation. And then I'll follow that up with a formal mathematical derivation for marginal revenue where we plug and chug using the marginal revenue formal. Well, you'll see. How about I go in there? It does take time to run you through all of this, but let me get in there. Okay, so graphical illustration, right? We have our price on the y-axis, quantity on the x-axis, and we see P1 and Q1 at, let's call this point X. Let's call that point X. Let me change my color. Let's use black instead to keep everything consistent. Okay, that's point X, P1, Q1. Now, P1 times Q1 is total revenue. So the entire area that is bounded by the axis, the y-axis, the x-axis, right? And starts from 0 to P1 to X to Q1 and back to 0, right? That area, that shaded area you can see here, that is total revenue, and I'm naming that TR1 or total revenue 1. Now let me clean that up for a minute because we have other things we're trying to do today. So let's try to clean it off without taking everything off here. Okay, so we have this first price P1. Let's assume that prices fall. If prices fall to say P2 right here, you can see that with that new lower price, we sell a larger quantity, Q2. Very good. So what has happened? Well, because we are selling a larger quantity, Q2, you can see that we have lost some, and I'm going to shade that in crayon. You can see that we have lost some total revenue right here. All right. Let's call that area A. Okay. Because we are producing a larger quantity, we lose some total revenue, the red shaded area A. But because we are producing a larger quantity, we are gaining this pink shaded area. We are gaining this pink shaded area. Let's call that area C, just to be consistent. You see shortly why I am naming them that. You see, so great. Now what about this other area? I believe I shaded it green somewhere. So let's keep that consistent. Let's name that area B. So, okay, what is this total revenue 2? Total revenue 2 is P2 times Q2, right? And P2 times Q2 is exactly areas B plus C. Areas B plus C. Now, the first part, P1 times Q1, P1 times Q1 is areas A plus B. And so the marginal revenue, which is, I hope you remember this from your principles class, since this is an intermediate session, that marginal revenue is known as the change in total revenue divided by the change in quantity. And so what is that? Well, that is exactly total revenue 2, TR2, minus TR1 divided by change in Q. But, well, you can see that all of that is B plus C minus A plus B. Well, the B's go away, and so I have C minus A. So marginal revenue is area C minus area A. Let's assume this point here, marking total revenue 2, is Y. And so as you move to the right-hand side, from point X on your graph to point Y on your graph, what is happening? Well, what happens is you lose some revenue from increasing output, right? So from point X to Y, we lose some revenue from increasing output. And so that the revenue we lose some revenue, that is area A. Area A. Okay, what else is happening? Well, as we move from point X to Y, we gain some revenue. You guessed it, we gain area C. We gain some revenue from increasing output from Q1 to Q2. And that is area C. Cool. So please pause the video and go over if you need to go over. If you have questions, please leave them in the comment section if you live on the YouTube streets. Otherwise, if you're taking any of my classes, get to office hours or email me and we'll take care of it. All right, moving on. Let's expand on this first graph. Which first graph? The first graph we drew up here, right? We are going to expand on it. If you notice, I have a similar graph, but we are going to change names on along the price axis and along the quantity axis to help us do a formal derivation of marginal revenue. So how about I call that with change in price. This is 0, of course, and here is P. And how about I call this I call this Q, and I call the width along the base of C change in Q. This is really going to help us draw this up. So area C, what I'm going to do is write out the area of C. C is like a rectangle, and so the height of C is P, right? I'm reading the height of C along the price axis. The height of C goes from 0 to P along the price axis, right? And then the base of C goes, well, the base of C is change in Q. And so the area of C is P times change in Q. And so I'm just going to write that here. P times change in Q. Okay, minus. Now the area of A. The area of A, the height of A on the graph you're seeing here to your left-hand side, the height of A is changing P, and the base of A is Q. And so minus the area will be change in P times Q. Okay, so we can make P stand alone in the first term so that we have P by dividing through the right hand side by changing Q. We have that changing P over changing Q times Q, something like this. Now, can we go back? For those who are confused, the way to check this kind of math is you try to go back that way by multiplying each term, right? So this is one term and this is the other term. Multiply each term by changing Q so that you go back to the previous line. I hope you see that. Please pause and check on a sheet of paper that it's correct. All right. And so what have we found here? Well, what we have found here is marginal revenue. Marginal revenue. Now, for those who think, hey, this looks a little different from my textbook here. Yeah, it's similar, or it's the same really. Change in P over change in Q. This is slope of the inverse demand curve. You see, that's slope of the inverse demand curve, right? Slope of the demand curve is changing the thing on the y-axis divided by changing the thing on the x-axis. But right here, I am assuming that it is the absolute value of slope of inverse demand curve. Okay, so if you use that, you will notice that it's the same as what you might have seen before. Absolute value of slope of inverse demand curve. The reason I like to use this is so that students can see that marginal revenue, now let me switch to red here. Students, I want students to see that marginal revenue is not price. Marginal revenue is price minus some value, right? Marginal revenue is price minus some value being this part here. Price minus some value. That way you know that marginal revenue for the monopoly is less than price. Right, so what's the interpretation here? For the monopoly, marginal revenue is less than price. Marginal revenue is price minus some value. What about for perfect competition? Well, still continue to take a look at this formal mathematical derivation we have here. We have MR, marginal revenue, equal price minus change in P over change in Q times Q. Now, I want to ask you a question here. When we say firms in perfect competition are price takers, what do we mean? We mean that their change in price is exactly zero. And so for perfect competition, change in price is zero. So all of this will be zero. If change in price is zero, then the numerator is zero divided by Q, doesn't matter, it's zero. Divide that by changing Q, it's zero. Multiply that by Q, it's zero. And so marginal revenue equals price for perfect competition, because in perfect competition, firms are price takers. It's super fascinating to see this show up this way, that this formal mathematical derivation can help us have a hold on why For the monopoly, marginal revenue is less than price, but for perfect competition, marginal revenue is exactly price. And that comes from the change in P, right? Change in P is 0 in perfect competition. It's not 0, though, for the monopoly. For those who don't remember what I'm talking about, I need you to cast your mind back to the demand curve for each firm in perfect competition. It's horizontal, right? Now, I'm going to attempt to draw a small graph here. Price on the price axis, quantity on the quantity axis, and we have here P and MR, right? In perfect competition, firms can produce, whatever quantity they want to produce at that price P. They can't change P, right? Change in price has to be 0. The slope of this horizontal line is 0. Right? Slope is rise over run. What's the rise here exactly? 0. Good. So this graph is for each, right? For each perfect competition PC for short, for each perfect competition firm. Okay. I hope this makes sense. Cool. So the last bit of this video, now let's go back to check the agenda to make sure we are ticking things off and getting work done, right? Okay, so we just finished this last part for the interpretation for monopoly. Yay, that's good. And so we are working on this part, and I will end the video and start another one to do the other stuff, right? So I'm not trying to kill you today. I'll try again on another day. Okay, so what we're going to do next is look at some inverse demand curve and try to derive marginal revenue and observe two interesting facts about the marginal revenue, and then draw the inverse demand curve and the marginal revenue curve, and then we'll call the video done. Okay, so very quickly, let's jump in. So we are given the inverse demand curve, and well, based on how I have been doing this, the slope, what is the slope if you have inverse demand curve P equals A minus BQ? Well, the slope will be, let's try blue, let's get rid of these two question marks. The slope, you know the slope to be negative B, right? The slope is negative B. But the way I have defined change in P over change in Q, I have defined it as the absolute value of slope of the inverse, absolute value of slope of inverse demand curve. And so here I am going to say change in P over change in Q, because of the way I have written marginal revenue with a negative sign instead of a positive sign as it is in some books. I'm writing this as the absolute value of negative B, and so that will be just B. This is important for where we are going next. And so let's go to that point then. All right, so marginal revenue is equal to P minus change in P over change in Q times Q. And so where is the plug and chug? Well, what is P? You go back to the inverse demand curve, up here, right to your left-hand side, up here, and you will notice that P equals A minus BQ. Write it down. Let's write it down. Spencer, write it down. A minus BQ, right? Okay, minus, well, change in P over change in Q. Well, that is our B. And then we multiply that by the Q right there, Q. Okay, and so from here, I hope you can see that we have A minus BQ minus BQ. And so that is A. There are two minus BQs, so minus 2BQ. And that's marginal revenue. But what do you observe when you compare this marginal revenue equals A minus 2BQ to this inverse demand curve equals A minus BQ? Oh, they have the same intercept. Exactly. They have the same intercept. So inverse demand curve and marginal revenue have the same demand curve. Let's write that down. Inverse demand curve and marginal revenue MR have the same intercept. Very good. Okay. Cool. What else do you notice? Look at this. Look at the slope. In inverse demand curve, the slope is minus B, and in MR, the slope is minus 2B, right? So what does that mean? Well, the slope for marginal revenue is bigger, and that means that the marginal revenue curve is steeper. All right. If you have two curves where one is steeper, the steeper one, which also has the same intercept as the inverse demand curve, the steeper curve will lie below the inverse demand curve. And so marginal revenue has twice the slope of inverse demand curve. This means it is steeper. Let's write that properly. Meaning, how about meaning, right? Meaning it is steeper. MR is what? MR is steeper. MR is steeper than the inverse demand curve. And also that means MR will lie below the inverse demand curve and steeper and will lie below. Inverse demand curve. This stuff is quite interesting. It tells you how to plot these curves and where to plot the curve. I love this stuff. Okay, and will lie below inverse demand curve. Okay, inverse demand curve. I'm too excited today for economics. Okay, so to have this video go fast, I drew them for us, and well, they have the same intercept, right? So this will be A, and what will be here? Well, this will be A over B, right? That intercept is A over B. Well, is A over B, and this one here is A over 2B. And on that note, the video is done. An alarm is going off. I hope you cannot hear it. Dr. T out. Like and subscribe.